Hey guys, Mrs. Carraz here. Today we're looking at Chapter 5, Section 3, From Protest to Rebellion. Okay, so a reminder from last section. Remember that King George had repealed most of the Townshend Acts except for the tax on tea. And many colonists drank tea as part of their daily routine, so they were really troubled by this act. They felt like every time they purchased tea, they're paying a tax that was pushed on them without their approval. This obviously is going to make the colonists angry, and this is how the British respond. So in 1773, British Parliament passes the Tea Act. The Tea Act declares three things. So first of all, the price of tea will be lowered, the actual sale value of tea. The East India Company, which distributed tea in part, could ship directly to the colonies instead of stopping in Britain, right? Remember, we had that Navigation Act that said shipments to the colonies had to stop in England first. Now they can come directly here. The East India Company shipments of tea specifically. Furthermore, the Tea Act declares that only the East India Company could sell tea in the colonies. And this meant that they had a monopoly, or total control of the market for a certain product. In this case, tea, obviously. So, when we're thinking about the Tea Act, on one hand, colonists are happy that the price of tea is lowered, right? If the price drops, they're spending less money. That's good news. But the tax hasn't changed. They're still being taxed on that tea, and the tax is what they had a problem with in the first place. So even if less money is going out of their pockets overall, they're still angry that this tax that they did not approve is in place. We also have this now monopoly that the East India Company has, and that's going to hurt colonial merchants who used to sell tea, right? They can't import tea from other people. They have to buy from the East India Company, which means the East India Company could set prices, potentially higher than necessary. Maybe the branding isn't as good or the product itself isn't as good as colonists could get from other tea merchants. So if you're selling tea in the colonies, you're not so pleased. And what do you know? All this talk about tea leads us to a familiar sounding event, the Boston Tea Party. So we talked briefly in class earlier in the week about the Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty were groups of colonists who organized together, and they really did not like British control over the colonies. That's an understatement. But at this time, they specifically organized in port cities to stop the import of tea from the East India Company. They do not want this tea even coming in because they feel like Britain is again doing things without colonial permission. So the Sons of Liberty would threaten ship captains, saying, if you try to unload your tea here, sir, a world of hurt is coming your way. And they even established boycotts of tea, trying to convince other colonists not to buy it. And the Sons of Liberty were really successful in a lot of major port cities like New York and Philadelphia. Boston, of course, is another major port. We know that from looking at the economy of the different colonial regions. And Thomas Hutchinson, who was a governor of Boston at the time, really did not want to see the Sons of Liberty gain power there. So here was the deal, right? If you were a captain and you sailed a tea ship, it's your job to unload your merchandise here, right? That's the whole point of why you sailed across the sea. If you were stopped from dropping off your cargo, and therefore if you didn't get paid, you needed some sort of justification to bring back to your bosses on the other side of the ocean. So typically, you would get paperwork explaining why, from the government explaining why you didn't drop off your tea. Thomas Hutchinson refuses to give this paperwork, right? He says, you are going to drop off your tea. There is no reason. I don't care that you're being threatened. I don't care that there are boycotts. I don't care what's going on. You're dropping off this tea. You're doing your job. And only then can you return to England. So, in Boston, they had no choice. These captains of ships who were delivering tea agreed to have their men unload their cargo, and that will be that. Or will it? So on December 16th, 1773, a group of men disguised themselves as Native Americans, and they board a tea ship in Boston Harbor. We'll talk more about why that was the disguised choice in class. And over the next 3 hours, they throw 342 cases of tea into the harbor, while there's a large crowd on the shore watching them do this and cheering them on. No one's trying to stop them, really. In the process, these men destroy 90,000 pounds of tea, and that's pound as in weight, not pound as in British money. And this tea was worth thousands of dollars. Needless to say, King George is not thrilled by this. He was really angry that the Boston Tea Party took place. So he decides to pass super harsh laws to make an example out of the rebels in Boston. Because he thinks if we really punish them for doing this, then the other colonies won't get inspired to do the same thing. So the laws that he passes become known as the Intolerable Acts, because they were so strict that the colonists could not even tolerate them. And tolerate can be another word for stand. So here we go. We're going to go through them one by one, starting with the Boston Port Act. So the Boston Port Act closes the port of Boston completely, which means no ships can go in or out, until the East India Company is repaid for the tea that was destroyed. We know, right, that Boston's economy revolves around this port. We know that the New England colonies make their money by building ships, manning ships, being merchants for goods that were brought in on ships. So this is going to devastate Boston's economy. It is a huge, huge problem. Next, we have the Massachusetts Government Act. And the Massachusetts Government Act said that all positions in the Massachusetts government would be determined by the British. So either the king himself would put people in power, or governors under British control would nominate people to have power. The Massachusetts Government Act abolished or destroyed the upper house of the Massachusetts legislature, which was the house where colonists had a say. And they said that those town meetings, which colonists really took as such a big part of their communities, could only occur once per year. So we're seeing that this Massachusetts Government Act is completely removing the colonists' voice in their own government. We know from their history of having a say in their government that they're not going to like this. Next, we've got the Administration of Justice Act. They just keep coming. So this one says that if a colonist was accused of killing a British official, his trial would either take place in a different colony or in Britain itself, because Massachusetts couldn't be trusted to carry out a fair trial. We've got the Quartering Act, which should sound familiar, and this really just strengthened the 1765 Quartering Act. This one wasn't just specific to Massachusetts, it applied to all colonies. And basically it said that the governor could place British troops in any home, and if suitable homes aren't available, he could really put them wherever he sees fit, including in a business. So imagine being a small business owner trying to make money for yourself and your family, and you also need to cater to soldiers in that same space. It's going to complicate things. This last one, some people consider it one of the Intolerable Acts. Some people look at it as a separate act of Parliament. So the Quebec Act. This set up a government for the land that was taken from France after the French and Indian War. And specifically, it claimed that land between the Ohio and Missouri rivers was now going to be considered part of Canada. It would not be available for the colonists to use. So this meant taking land away from several colonies that thought this land was part of them, and it blocked colonists from moving further west. So again, we saw this with the Proclamation of 1763. Colonists are here for land. They want to gain their own territory. They want to be able to move as they see fit. They're not pleased with this one either. Alright, so this brings us to the First Continental Congress, and I know that this section is long, so I apologize. So the First Continental Congress takes place in 1774. 12 of the 13 colonies sent delegates or representatives to go and speak together at this meeting. Georgia did not send one. I'm not quite sure why. So together, these representatives demanded a few different things. They wanted a repeal or an official end of the Intolerable Acts. They wanted colonial right to tax and govern themselves. They said, we are across the ocean from you, King George. How could you possibly know what life is like here for us? We want to be in charge of us. The colonists wanted to train a militia to stand up to British troops. Obviously, we just had the Boston Massacre, right? We know the troops can be violent against the colonists themselves. Well, we want armed men here in the colonies to fight and stand up for themselves if they have to. And furthermore, we want a boycott of British goods. And we've seen this, I think, as a theme throughout this chapter, right? If someone is hurting you, sometimes the best place to hurt them back is in their wallets. And that is exactly what the colonists wanted to do, take money away from Britain for not treating us right. Here is the British response. So obviously the British have no intention of meeting the demands of the First Continental Congress. I'm reminded of that declaratory act, right, that said you can, you're not the boss of us. We still have power over you. So they're not about to listen to what the colonists have to say. So Britain decides to use military power to restore their control in the colonies. And colonists see this coming, and they react by forming their own military units as Minutemen. And Minutemen are citizen soldiers who could be ready to fight at a moment's notice. So here's the big event. Here's a turning point in our little history story here. So General Thomas Gage, who now at this time is the governor of Massachusetts, sends 700 troops to capture colonial leaders in Massachusetts specifically. The idea is if they capture the leaders, right, this will kind of disband everyone else, get them to break up, and now the resistance to British power will be a lot weaker. So colonists get wind of this fact that these troops are coming for them. So Paul Revere and William Dawes ride through town to warn the Minutemen and get them ready to fight against these troops that are coming. And yes, this is the whole the British are coming thing. We'll get to that in class. So by the time these 700 British troops arrived, 77 Minutemen were ready to fight when the British arrived. I butchered that sentence. We're going to roll with it anyway. So we've got 77 colonists standing up to 700 trained British soldiers. The odds don't seem to be in their favor. So we get here, the British and colonists run into each other, for lack of a more precise term, and the British basically tell the Minutemen, go home. Like, we're looking for specific people, we're looking for the leaders, get out of here, you don't have to get hurt here. The colonists refuse. They're not just going to back down that easily. And at this point, a shot rings out. We don't know if it was from the colonists or if it was from the British. There's no clear record. But this shot brings about more fighting, and this is considered the shot that began the American Revolution. It's nicknamed the shot heard round the world because obviously the ramifications of our revolution are going to change what the world really looks like. So at this point, fighting breaks out in Lexington, Concord, and Boston. And by the time the British return to Boston, they've suffered 300 casualties. And remember that casualties are people either hurt, wounded, or missing during a military battle. So we're seeing that even though there were only 77 colonists, they're already putting up a fight. And we're going to see how that fight continues next week. All right, have a great afternoon, guys. Bye.